So you're a World of Warcraft fan, huh? Okay, tell me every version of World of Warcraft that currently exists in 2024, because there's probably going to be a few more than you'd expect. If you said 6, you'd be correct enough, there's technically 7, but 6 is really close enough to the mark. In fact, there's never been this much choice for which version of World of Warcraft you want to play. Back in my day, what we'd do when we didn't like the game, we'd complain about it, we'd post on the forums, we'd unsubscribe, and then we'd resubscribe a week later. These days, however, you're given so much choice. And in all this choice, I think things could end up being a little bit confusing. What do these different versions of WoW do? What kind of player are they for? Which version should you check out as a newer player or maybe as a returning player? After all, this game's been around for nearly 20 years, and as we are currently, there's a lot of different versions of it. You can still split the content into broadly being around retail version or the current version of the game and of Classic, and I'm going to start off with retail and go over the game versions for that, and then we'll go to Classic afterwards, and hopefully you can get a good idea of what World of Warcraft can offer in 2024. We'll begin with Dragonflight, which at the moment is very much getting towards its final stages. In fact, just the other day, Blizzard revealed the roadmap for the release of the next expansion, The War Within, which will be coming out on August 26th. And we do know from last BlizzCon as well, Blizzard are planning to do something a bit different with the future expansions for the modern version of the game. In fact, we know the next 3 names of the expansions. We have The War Within, Midnight, and then The Last Titan. And they've also mentioned they want to do a slightly shorter content cadence for the expansions as a whole, where they may be closer to perhaps the year mark, but we don't know how that's going to play out. For Dragonflight itself, it's been received in a much better light than the previous 2 expansions, which were generally looked down upon by most, to those being Battle for Azeroth and the Shadowlands. Dragonflight has shedded away a lot of that repeatable content, which felt as though it had to be done in order to keep your character up to the correct power level, and it's introduced lots of features as well, such as dragon riding, which gives much more weight and feeling to your mount, and the retail version of the game also has a lot more story-based content and cutscenes as well compared to the classic versions of the game. Of course, as World of Warcraft always has done, Dragonflight has tons of PvE content, ranging from leveling dungeons that you can queue into remotely, all the way to Mythic Plus, which is an ever-scaling challenge. It's a similar story of raiding, where you can go from LFR, which you can just queue up from and get yourself into a raid to see them, to Mythic, which is going to need an organized group and a lot of attempts to get anything down. Just to mention as well, in The War Within during the first raid, they're trying something new called Story Mode, which to me sounds like what LFR should have really been from day one, where you're queuing into the dungeon in a scaling group size from between 1 to 5 players to see what happens story-wise. We don't know too much about this other than that yet, but I think it sounds like a very interesting feature. What the modern version of the game also has is just way more content in terms of there being things to do. I mean, this is the version of the game that's nearly 20 years old. You'd hope there'd be more to do, and there is. From dungeons, raiding, to the PvE, to there being far more emphasis on collections through toys, pets, mounts, achievements. There's pretty much a near endless stream of things to do on the retail version of the game, which will keep you very busy as a new or returning player. On the more negative side, there hasn't been too many criticisms about Dragonflight which people have come up with time and again. I'd say if you're looking to get into the expansion now, the only potential issue would be the timing of it. It really is getting to that period of time when we're near the end of it, and it does feel as though it's a bit of a waiting room for the next expansion, The War Within. I also find whenever you come back into the retail version of the game, as much as there is a lot of stuff to do, it can feel very overwhelming because you just don't know what you should be doing, if that makes sense. You're just thrown an absolute ton of different stuff, and you have to dig through it and find out what's worth it for your character and what you want to do the most. Overall though, Dragonflight is one of the more positively received World of Warcraft expansions in recent times, and as much as I would be able to recommend it for a new or returning player, again the timing is just a little bit odd at the moment. I say wait for the pre-patch now because they always catch your characters up on gear really fast, and they lay out the story for the next expansion in a cohesive manner. When you come back to a retail version of the game, especially at the end of the expansion, there's just a lot of story which might not really make sense in the order everything happens, and you don't really see the payoffs to the end of the story because you're swept away into the next story. Alternatively, you could play one of the newest game modes Blizzard has added, and the first fully fledged alternative version of the retail game. This is called Mists of Pandaria Remix. This is a limited time game mode that takes players back through Pandaria's content at a super accelerated pace. And at the end of Mop Remix's fixed duration, which will be Monday 19th August, all created characters will be moved over to Dragonflight or The War Within pre-patch. Mr. Pandaria Remix isn't supposed to be a replacement for Mop Classic if you are more of a Classic fan. They haven't confirmed they're going to do Mop Classic either, but again, it just isn't a replacement to the original experience for me. And I think that's the case because as much as you're playing through the Mr. Pandaria content, you are just blasting through it in no time at all, and you're still using the Dragonflight abilities, talents, and so on. So it's not quite what Mr. Pandaria would have been in a Classic version. On the good side for Mop Remix, it's definitely something new to do while you wait for the War Within pre-patch as a more retail-focused player, or just somebody who wants to focus on collection content from Mr. Pandaria. Because that really is one of the highlights of it. A lot of the big, very difficult things to get from Mr. Pandaria, think of the Tusks of Manoroth from Garrosh, the Heavenly Onyx Cloud Serpent, the Mount from Hualon on the Timeless Isle, all of those can be bought for a deterministic currency called Bronze, which you earn from just playing the game mode. So if you're collection focused, it could very well be worth leveling up a character to 70 and then cashing them out. You can also begin on dungeon and raid content super early on in Mop Remix. There's not this usual cycle in WoW where you have to wait a long time before you can get into some endgame dungeons and raids. On the more negative side for Mr. Pandaria Remix, this isn't kind of like any other version of WoW that's existed at all. It's a limited time game mode, so of course this makes sense, but as a new player, this will be a really strange place to start, I think. There has been some drama surrounding Mop Remix too about people farming too fast and getting powerful too fast and then having their characters scaled back, which has left a sour taste in some people's mouth. And I also think it has created a bit of confusion around, well, are they going to do Mr. Pandaria Classic now? Is this not going to happen? Is it a replacement? What exactly is this game mode? Overall, I'd say if you're familiar with how retail characters play at the moment, this will be a blast from the past and a bit of Mr. Pandaria nostalgia in terms of raids and content. If you're a collection enjoyer, this kind of feels like a no-brainer and you should be doing it. Level a character up to cap, cash out your bronze, get some mounts and transmog items, which would otherwise be really hard to farm. But overall, I think if you're newer to the game, this wouldn't be a good starting point because it's just so different to what World of Warcraft usually is, and as a limited time game mode, it's serving the more familiar audience who want something a bit more fast-paced whilst they wait for the next expansion. That's everything for retail. Now let's move on to Classic. So we should do a bit of a rundown what's happened so far. So we've played through Vanilla, which was released in 2019 for Classic, then the Burning Crusade, then Wrath of the Lich King. And now we are currently on Cataclysm Classic. And this whole Classic thing seems to be going to carrying on as far as there is a demand for it. I think we'll go up to Legion, but hey, I really don't know. As we'll get on to soon, there are still options if you want to play the vanilla version of the game, but there are currently no servers on which to play the Burning Crusade or Wrath of the Lich King exclusively. So your choices are vanilla, a version of vanilla, or Cataclysm at the moment. So Cata first. On the positive side, well, it's fresh. It just released the other week, and fresh plus expansion just tends to work even if they don't end up doing so well in the long run. A positive with Classic as a whole is that you don't need to actually buy a game to play it. You just get yourself a subscription and you download it, and that's all you need. And this is true for all the different versions of Classic as well, so you can get quite a lot of different experiences for one subscription. There are also just a lot of, well, that makes sense moments in the game, such as having a stats panel that tells you what, you know, your stats do, for instance. That's just a nice touch. There's a lot of these different things. And if you played Classic in the past and thought, how on earth do people play this? My Retribution Paladin's rotation is right click and I've learned that by level 4, then that's not the case in Cata anymore. The classes are a lot more involved with more rotations, cooldowns, defensive, offensive abilities, and so on. It's still pretty straightforward gameplay for the most part, but it is satisfying to pull off. There's more difficult content with heroic dungeons. They are post-nerf, it's not as hard as it was back in the day and is very puggable through the LFD, and there is also more challenging raiding, which is definitely a step up, and difficulty-wise, despite it not being entirely post or pre-nerf, it's somewhere in the middle, is in, I think, a good spot. Cataclysm is one of the 2 expansions in this game's history where if you want to do challenging content as a 10-player guild, you absolutely can, because 10-player raids have the same rewards as 25, and Blizzard are also planning a faster content cadence for this expansion. We shouldn't be sitting in Dragon Soul for 12 months again. Well, I certainly hope not anyway. On the PvP side of things, people also put Cata in a positive light, saying the balance is overall improved compared to previous vanilla expansions, and it doesn't take an excessive amount of time to get into. On the more negative side, if you're a returning player and you're leveling a character, the new system where you only need to learn the ability once instead of getting spell ranks can feel kind of strange. Some of the core abilities for your classes aren't learned till very late levels. It feels as though you're kind of missing stuff until you hit level probably around 70 to 80 plus. Of course, the old world of Eastern Kingdoms and Kalimdor is gone. That's one of the big central features of Cataclysm. Some people prefer that old world, which is completely understandable, but yeah, it's different now, and you're going to be getting storylines which you can really play through in retail if you wanted to. And I think Cata's still a bit lacking in content which isn't go do raid or PvP. I think it's the final expansion which is like this, by the way, and Mr. Pandaria really expanded on horizontal content with much more collections, Brawlers Guild, challenge modes, so on and so forth, but I imagine we'll get there one day as well. There is more to do in Cata than Wrath, but if you're mainly into collections, it'll keep you busy for a long time, but it doesn't stack up with how much to do there is on retail. Overall for Cata, the game's just come out, so it's fresh, and you don't need to buy any game to actually play it. If you ever wanted to try this expansion out, now is pretty much the best time you're gonna get. It's a good mix between the content difficulty and pacing, between your typical vanilla, classic, and retail. If vanilla didn't really meet your needs to have a challenge within the game, I'd definitely give Cata a go. And as much as Cata tends to get a bad rep among WoW fans, how people play the game nowadays with being so much more endgame and performance focused, I actually think it's gonna do quite well, and it's fitting for how people enjoy the game now. Next we have Season of Discovery. So Season of Discovery is World of Warcraft Classic's second seasonal server, which at the moment is about 6 months old. Season of Discovery has had phased leveling releases, where we could explore new leveling brackets and the meta that shaped around those levels, those being originally yours being capped at 25, then 40, and currently 50. Phase 4, which will raise the level cap to 60, should be coming relatively soon, perhaps in the next month and a half or so at the latest. Season of Discovery has a big emphasis on adding stuff to the original vanilla format to give people a bit of a different experience. It's added tons of new abilities into the game through a rune engraving system, where you have to discover these runes out in the world, and then you learn them, then you engrave them onto your gear. Some of these abilities are brand new creations, such as making Lightning Shield into an AoE ability. Other ones are familiar to what exists in other expansions, such as there being Divine Storm, Chaos Bolt, Lava Burst, plenty more examples. There are even totally new class identities we've never seen in the game before, such as Shaman Tank, Warlock Tank, Rogue Tank, Paladin Tank. Okay, we've seen that one before, but it was kind of not very good in vanilla. It's good now though. And Mage Healer as well. On the positive side for Season of Discovery, it's definitely differentiated itself from vanilla, and the meme specs, think of Ret, Enhanced, Shadow and so on, are way more powerful across the board. It's built on class design a lot, and classes in general just have more interesting and involved rotations. It's got a bunch of new content, such as finding the runes out in the world. It's reworked a bunch of dungeons into raids, such as Black Fathom's Deep, Gnomeregan and Sunken Temple. It's got profession updates, there's new PvP events in STV and Ashenvale, and tons more. Blizzard have tried a lot of stuff with Season of Discovery. Some of it's gone good, some of it not so much. So if I'm being honest, at the moment when I look at the negative side of Season of Discovery, it's not in its greatest period of time at the moment, with probably its lowest player count since launch. Cataclysm could be partly at fault here, but Phase 3 has kind of been dragged out a bit to A, give Cataclysm its time to breathe during its launch period, and B, to prepare for Phase 4 and us reaching our level cap of 60. And as much as there are a lot of new abilities, a bunch of them are copy-pasted from future expansions and not original ideas. We've seen so much power creep in PvE and PvP. People are putting out damage numbers at level 40 or 50 that you wouldn't even see at 60. And thus far in Season of Discovery, there's been no PTR testing to try and keep things hidden so we can, discover them. But a lot of things have released in extremely broken states, from some runes just being permanently bad, others being overpowered, some new additions to the game awarding far too much experience or gold. It's been a roller coaster. And as a player, you get the impression as though the server really did need more of a dedicated team assigned to it for its whole duration, rather than it being kind of a on-the-side project. That's at least how it feels for me. Overall, though, news for Phase 4 and Season of Discovery should start happening in the near future, and there's going to be a PTR as well, and there's going to be testing done for our level 60 classes with the full toolkit of abilities, all the new runes, and even some of the new tier sets. I'd be hesitant to recommend playing here though, and I expect there to be a bunch of quality of life features added in Phase 4, especially when it comes to gathering runes from previous phases. Either way though, leveling doesn't take too much time. There's a massive XP buff for your whole leveling journey, so if leveling's previously put you off vanilla, it takes nowhere near as long in Season of Discovery. And vanilla's endgame usually proves popular, so once Phase 4 happens, I do think there'll be people coming back to the game. If you do decide to give Season of Discovery a go though, I would be wary about the type of server that you pick. Some servers are very low population, and vanilla doesn't have automated group finding systems, so they're really no good. And on PvP servers, anyone can attack you in any contested zone, which is probably about 90% of the world. So if that doesn't sound fun to you, maybe you should steer clear of them as well. If you're looking to do a bit of chill leveling, find some new runes, see what it's all about, I'd recommend the PvE servers personally, which, whether you're on EU or NA, would be Wild Growth. Next we have Classic Era, another version of vanilla. I'm not done yet, so this one needs a bit of explaining. When vanilla initially transitioned onto Burning Crusade, Blizzard created these splinter servers, if you will, called Classic Era. What they did was they took a snapshot of all the characters and put them onto this new server cluster. These Classic Era servers are persistently on Phase 6 of Classic. That means all the content is out, from Molten Core to Naxxramas. And there's been very few content updates on these servers for the whole duration, and they're maintaining a decent population of people who do just want to play the base game without all these new additions. On the positive side, it's that good old classic feel. It's cozy, and it's probably what you remember from back in the day if you've ever tried it. And if you've never tried it, well, you can right here. It's an option for you. The server's been out for several years now with no real changes, so there's no FOMO, there's no I'm missing out, there's no I'm too late. It's just there if you want to give it a go, and I think that's a really positive thing. And as mentioned, it's still active. There are people who just want to blast Naxxramas again and again on their warrior, and fair play to them because it's an option Blizzard are providing, so make the most of it. On the negative side, these servers are old, and with vanilla's basically zero gold sinks in the game, the economy is let's just say not in a good place if you're a new player. When it comes to raiding, there are soft reserve groups, meaning you'll pick an item that you want, and if it drops then you can roll on it during the raid, as well as guild groups going, but oftentimes a lot of groups are focused around GDKP, which means when an item drops you bid for it with gold. And given the server being really old and prices of everything being hyperinflated, you're just not going to have enough gold, which can make it a bit difficult to get into initially. Overall though, if you want the basic vanilla experience, that's what Classic Era is. It's not without its occasional issues, but it is there for you to try out. Whilst other games have hype periods, they have peaks and troughs, Classic Era remains and exists. And if you want to see how WoW all began all those years ago, it's right there for you. Next we have another version of vanilla, Hardcore World of Warcraft. So these servers were released sometime last year to a huge amount of hype. Basically there'd been a community challenge taking place on the Classic era realms where people were getting as far as they could on their characters without dying. And that's in essence what Hardcore WoW is. Your character has one life. When Blizzard released their official servers, the rule set was slightly different to the community one though, and you can trade, you can use the auction house, and you can use the mailbox as well. There aren't any grouping restrictions either, so it really is you're just playing as normal. But if you die, well, that's it, sorry, you're gonna have to go again. A positive is, however, if you do die on these servers, you can transfer over to Classic Era if you want to continue playing them. But if you want a new character on Hardcore, back to the creation screen. There was also the self-found mode for Hardcore added to more recently. This more closely emulates the community challenge in that your character's self-sufficient for, well, everything they need to do. So they cannot use mailboxes, they can't trade, they can't use the auction house. They can still group and do group content such as dungeons and so on, but if you're trying to craft something and you need an iron bar, you better find a mob that drops an iron bar, go farm chests, or level up your mining. On the positive side for Hardcore Classic, it's a bit of a testing ground for veteran players who have done it all and want a new challenge. And vanilla is really a game of preparation and knowledge over skill and reactions. It's uniquely rewarding, and it's got that leveling journey which is so timelessly replayed in vanilla with a twist. And you get a lot more attached to your character as well, because if you die, you don't even want to know how many hours some people invest into the leveling journey. There are people who even raid on Hardcore and have completed everything in the game. And it's similar to Era in some regards. It's just there. There's no FOMO, there's no too late, there's no missing out. If you want to play it, you can, and it's just going to be there. And that's a positive for me. And it's still got a player base as well. It's not as popular as other versions of the game due to its nature of being far more punishing. But then again, the hardcore playstyle does more often lean into being solo, so it's kind of not as big of a deal. On the negative side, well, I couldn't recommend starting on hardcore, put it like that. If you played World of Warcraft for the first time and you got past level 12 on a hardcore server, I would be seriously impressed. And obviously, it's a big time investment to level, and you could disconnect and lose everything. That's just the nature of the beast. You're not going to get your character restored. When it's gone, and it can suck, but that's what it is. Overall, I reckon hardcore one day is going to see another big hype surge, but if you enjoyed the leveling journey over the end game in World of Warcraft and want something where you're really attached to your character and working towards something constantly, hardcore could be fun for you to try out. And I think that is just about everything, all the different versions of World of Warcraft that exist at the moment. There's never been as many choices as there are at the moment, there may never be again for that matter, so I thought I'd go over them all today and try and highlight a few different goods and bads and overalls and pretty much just give you an idea of what exists at the moment, and hopefully, if you're thinking of giving the game a go, you have a better idea of what would suit you. If you have anything to add, anything major for any version of the game which you think is worth a mention, of course, do drop it down in the comments. And as always, thank you so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you on the next one very soon.